In the north of the Hunan province, Yuyang. Everyone looks at a strange man who is seated on the ground. According to the man, time passes like the wind and leaves nothing behind. He used to go on a rampage around the world, unafraid of anything. He demolished everything in the blink of an eye and murdered all opponents in his path, mocking the world, earning him the nickname of Ultimate Divine Demon. He was known as both the world's most wicked person and the world's strongest man. However, he was stopped by the 8 Immortals, a group of humans that protect the Central Plains. They were unable to slay him, so they sealed the Ultimate Divine Demon, Dan Wu Hyun, in the lowest part of the Dongting Lake. In the end, 1,000 years had passed since Dan was frozen and imprisoned by the 8 Immortals. Even though the name, 8 Immortals, sounds majestic, they were just folks who had lost their wits to eating and playing around, and Dan voiced disbelief that he had been backstabbed by them but concluded that he was simply too weak. He walks down the street and realized that people he knew are no longer around. After all, there can't possibly be any humans who have lived for 1,000 years. Dan had nowhere to go and nowhere to stay. He was simply following the clouds and the wind for the rest of his life. It's as though he's been apprehended by the ghost of his past. He wonders if he's changed much during his 1,000-year confinement. As he walks around, he notices a child on the floor. He wonders if the child is a beggar. He checked on her and noticed she still had a pulse. The child opens its eyes, which shocked Dan because he could notice a tiny similarity to her when he was a child. Dan told her she was incredibly blessed as he infused vitality into her, making her better. She would still require physical nutrition, so he offers her a pill that has been around for 1,000 years since there is no food nearby. The following morning, the youngster reappeared and offered him a dumpling as payment for treating her. Dan, on the other hand, refused her food and wondered how she had no fear or bloodlust for him. The next day, she reappeared, attempting to provide the dumpling, and the day after that, Dan ate the dumpling with the child. Dan ate the food that the youngster provided him every day for half a month. Dan was taken aback by the child's innocent and pure smile, but he didn't mind it. Dan walks down the street and hears a ruckus. The store owner was furious because the child kept taking his dumplings. He yelled and attacked the child, which made Dan understand that everything she provided him was stolen. He kicked the store owner's hand, breaking his entire fingers while the store owner screamed in pain. Dan became irritated as he remembered the time he spent with the child. He survived on the food she brought him but couldn't believe she stole it while being beaten up by others. As he wandered aimlessly, he realized he had arrived at the place that had imprisoned him for millennia, the Dongting Lake. He sees the child again, this time hiding in the bush as she claims to have located him. Dan wondered why she was following him around so closely when he had only helped her once. He inquired as to why she was searching for him. She claimed that she didn't want to be alone any longer, as Dan realized he was alone as well, as he ruled by himself, and it was such a lonely life, and it's still the same even after 1,000 years. Dan inquired about her name, and she replied, Hwa Somi. He wonders if everything that is occurring to her is predestined and fated, and if she can build a situation where the current him is needed. He introduces himself to her and invites Somi to come with him. It was night when Dan decided to construct a home after realizing he had nowhere for them to stay. Somi wakes up in the morning and discovers a house. However, she stated that there was no house yesterday, to which Dan interrupted her to clarify that the house was there yesterday, but he simply fixed it up a little since it was a little run down. Somi couldn't believe it but recognized she was wrong because there was no reason for Dan to lie about it and no way such a nice-looking house would develop overnight. Dan was relieved that Somi loved it because he had put in a lot of work to create it. Dan was somewhat taken aback when she mentioned there were no fences. The fences arrived the next day, as Dan stated that they were there from the beginning, while Somi stated that she hadn't mentioned anything yet. However, she remarked that the house felt empty, and the next day, Somi was surprised to see a large tree and a pond. Dan discovered he still had a lot of things to make, such as a bed and other furnishings. He understood that having a hectic lifestyle isn't all bad. Dan stopped Somi with his finger as she was about to say something and began to build something. It was a pail in which Somi could bathe. Dan told Somi to stop running and stated he had acquired some clothes after selling a wild boar and some wood. He grabbed her while Somi replied that she was still clean and didn't need to wash up. Dan, on the other hand, ignored her pleas. Dan stated that Somi looked like a nice human after showering and questioned whether her clothes fit her. Somi commented that she had never worn such lovely clothing before and that it was stunning. However, she remarked that it didn't matter if the clothes didn't fit her, as she only wanted to be with him. Dan stated that she has kind words for someone so young and that it would be wonderful for them to live a tranquil life like this, while Somi smiled happily. However, two suspicious people were standing outside their residence while they were talking. There was a rumor going across Hunan province that there was a manor that arose near Dongting Lake. People said it was the work of a ghost, while Yuyang's magistrate, Hong Wanchang, wondered if the rumor was true, as someone claimed he couldn't confirm it but stated it was simply a rumor circulating about. Hong thought it was silly and said it was only a rumor but decided to have a look while taking a break. Hong and his men proceeded to inspect the manor at night. The guards are perplexed as to why Hong was upset, as it was just reported that several bandits stationed in the Hunan region had been terrorizing various communities in the area. In such case, the government wants to get rid of them as soon as possible, which explains why Hong is quite stressed about it. One of the guards questioned why no one was doing anything about the bandits if they were such horrible people. Someone said it was because of Jiang Baixin, the bandits' current leader. He possesses first-rate martial arts that most people would be unable to touch, as well as great horse-riding skills and the ability to flee when confronted with a martial master stronger than him. Because they couldn't apprehend him, the martial master decided to capture and behead his family members instead. However, someone informs Hong that because the imperial family is planning a large-scale extermination, he will have one less thing to worry about. Hong hopes that's the case, as he hasn't been able to rest in over a year. Hong's eyes widened when he discovered the manor was located near Dongting Lake. Some of the guards fell on their knees and begged forgiveness, fearful that it was the work of a ghost. Hong claimed that there was no such thing and that he would investigate the house. However, he suddenly sensed a strong bloodlust from behind him as he turned around and saw someone. Dan said that he had no recollection of inviting guests, but Hong suspected that the tremendous bloodlust was emanating from him and asked him if he was the owner of the manor. Dan informs him that he is, while Hong introduces himself as the Yuyang's magistrate, as everyone was pleased by Hong's cool demeanor. Hong inquired as to whether Dan had built it, to which Dan said that he had only renovated an abandoned house. Hong claimed that the land belonged to the country and that he could not build a house in an area where people are not permitted to live without permission. Dan, on the other hand, instructs him to merely grant him permission and then gives him a bunny to overlook the problem. Hong became outraged and informed everyone to capture Dan. Dan decided that it was preferable to observe rather than cause additional problems, and he was relieved that Somi was asleep. As they escorted Dan away, Hong reminded him that he had messed with the wrong person today and that he would not be let off easily. He said that he was mocked, who is the magistrate, and that it will not finish with flogging but could result in death. Hong had observed Dan's icy glare and wanted to get this over with as soon as possible. However, as they walked, Dan became aware that something was awry when a barrage of arrows was fired at them, killing all of the guards. Hong wondered who on earth did it, while someone called out his name and stated he was rather fearless, strolling around outside like that. He realized it was Jiang who had said his life was over. Hong recognized he'd made a mistake. It's been 6 months since Jiang's family was kidnapped and murdered. He didn't anticipate Jiang to be looking for him right now. Hong wondered if Dan would assist him, but quickly figured that he would not. Hong deemed that his sword was the only thing he could use as a weapon, but he realized that he couldn't win against dozens of them with it. Furthermore, he had to fight against the top martial artists commanded by Jiang. The bandits were eager to kill Hong as revenge for what he had done to their sister-in-law, and they also wanted to chop off Hong's limbs and feed them to the dogs. Hong begged for forgiveness, while Jiang stated that he had waited so long to hear it, and that there is no happier day than today. He longed to see more of Hong's terrified expression, but he couldn't because today was Hong's departure day to the other world. As the bandits took Hong away, they pondered what to do with Dan. Jiang then tells him he's lucky and sets him free. However, Dan asks Jiang to wait a moment as Jiang inquires if he was speaking to him. Dan inquired as to their plans for Hong. Jiang declared that he would kill him in the same way as he had slaughtered his family. However, Dan claimed that Jiang killed a large number of people, possibly more than Hong. He believed that Hong was only exacting vengeance on Jiang for the lives he had taken, which infuriated the bandits. However, Jiang stated what he would do about it, while Dan realized there were 50 bandits and asked Hong if he wanted to survive but only on the condition that he never cause any trouble with his manor again. Hong wondered if it was the manor he had just seen, while Dan said that it was a great offer. Hong tells him that if he is saved, he would do anything. When one of the bandits decided to attack Dan, he was sent flying and got knocked out. The bandits couldn't believe one of their strongest members had been defeated so quickly, while Jiang couldn't observe Dan's movement and wondered how he was captured by Hong. Jiang thought Dan was possibly stronger than him. However, he noted that if he is up against a large group of them, they may have a numerical advantage. He convinces himself that despite having battled countless martial masters, he has come a long way and that it would be fantastic if they could take Dan down in an instant. He informed everyone to kill Dan while all bandits were approaching to kill him. Dan had a brief thought about whether he should kill them or not, as it would be simple to do so. He could take them down with a single blow, but the prospect of having to pour blood again troubled him greatly. Dan closes his eyes as an explosion occurs when he has one of the bandits' necks in his grip. Everything came to a screeching halt when Jang witnessed something he couldn't believe. After the sword was thrown, it was struck with a stone that split into 100 shards and annihilated all his subordinates. Jang believed that a normal individual would have been unable to see that and questioned whether it was humanly conceivable to do that. He remarked that Dan was in a different league than all of the martial masters he had met thus far. He convinces himself not to think about vengeance and that if he takes even one step, he will be dead. Jang sprinted with all his strength the instant he realized what had happened. He left his fallen subordinates behind and moved his legs with all his power for the first time in his life. Dan wondered if Jang was fleeing and realized that his guts were much smaller than he had imagined. However, Hong urged Dan to capture Jang. Although Dan regards Hong as a terrible person and remarked that he dislikes going after someone who is fleeing, he had no choice but to assist Hong as the matter with his manor would be resolved. Dan quickly caught up to Jang, grabbing his head and smashing it to the ground. In the end, Hong awakens and realizes he's hanged from a tree branch. Dan informs him that their agreement is completed. He inquired of Hong whether he understood what he had just stated, to which Hong replied that he did. While Dan tried to warn him against picking a battle with his manor, Hong stopped him off by claiming that it would never happen again and that he should not worry about anything. Dan also told Hong not to talk about seeing him. He recalls what Somi said about attempting to smile when talking to others and how everyone would be terrified if he had such an emotionless face. He decided to smile and inform him that everything's good as long as he understands, while Hong realized that Dan is definitely a monster and tells himself that he would never go against him and do whatever he requested, and to never go near his manor or even come near the mountains ever again. Dan and Somi were walking down the streets of Yuyong's market in the north of Hunan province. She heard about the bandits being apprehended and that she was terrified as there were only 2 of them living in the forest. Dan asked if she was still nervous despite being with him, and she admitted she was a little nervous. As Somi was attracted by the fragrance of food, Dan thought that since that the bandits had been apprehended, and Hong's problem with the mansion had been resolved. Somi was surprised to see such great food, and Dan realized that, more than anything else, he needs money to raise a child. That is the end of the first part. I'll be making part 2 soon, so be sure to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. I hope to see you in the next video. Goodbye.